so we can get rolling. Talking about millennials and how to work with them, and we had some interesting conversation last week about millennials that was certainly eye-opening. What do you think, Craig?
Oh my God, yeah. It was, I guess, a lot of what we thought and just maybe we're afraid to say. But we had one of the people on Q the Brand who really gave us some great insights into how to make millennials more comfortable in the job atmosphere. And I think it was really terrific in that regard.
Yeah, she definitely, as a millennial herself,
right.
She gave us some insight. And I think one of the things we really uncovered when working with millennials is the behavior is really interpreted differently by different generations. And
right.
They want to feel like they're included in things. And I think older generations deem that more of they look like they are entitled to things, and that was a big change from seeing it more clearly.
I agree, and I'm wondering if it's not more of a, and this is probably the wrong terminology, but I think they're looking for a more, I'm going to say, touchy-feely type atmosphere where their feelings, their thoughts, their emotions are taken into account versus, I'll call it old school. My first job, it was, okay, this is your job. Do not, I'm not here to give you validation about what you're doing. You do your job. If you don't do it, you don't work here anymore. And I think millennials today want some of that validation, some of that conversation. Why am I doing this job? I believe one of the things I took away was they're going to question everything. Why, why is their new favorite, if you will?
Well, if we take what you just said about old school, do your job and that's it, that makes sense if that's not the way they want to be treated, and yet it is the way they're being treated, that naturally the question they'd have would be why. So that might be why it's their favorite question, because it's not inherently being answered if their managers are, an older generation and just used to dealing with people. This is your job. That's why.
It's the old parenting tack. Why do I? Because I said so. And my kids are always quick to remind me. There's a commercial right now where a father is, I guess, cleaning a car or something, and there's a little kid. Why? And the father's continually answering, and finally he just says, "Go ask your own dad." And I think millennials want those why questions about everything, regardless of whether we're explaining it or not. Even if you explain it, they want the why to the explanation. They want to be involved in the decision-making process. And employers have to, I believe they have to, come around to that. We want you to use this list because X, Y, Z. We want you to do this because it's what's, and they won't accept because we've always done it that way.
Well, that's a lousy answer anyway, for progress. But you made an interesting point talking about your kids, and we have a question as far as what is the age of millennials, and it's a little bit of an overlap. I've seen 18 to 34, and I've seen 19 to 29. So at the very least, it's everyone in their 20s. And potentially slightly in their early 30s. But one thing I wanted to touch on when you started talking about parenting. Now, your kids are a little younger than mine. And
yes.
When my oldest was small, there was a big shift in parenting. First of all, there were a lot of work-at-home moms. So that was a shift that moms were home more, but in a work parent kind of thing. Secondly, a lot of stuff, I'll say, came out very kid-oriented, Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon. All of a sudden, the world was catering to kids. And I remember thinking, oh, they didn't do this when I was a kid, right? And so I think there was a handful of years where the focus as parents, the focus was very much, everything was about the kids. How can we involve the kids? Yes, I admit, we brought our kids to Vegas. When Vegas went with it's more of a family thing, and they had little amusement parks, and we did it, and we realized, guess what? Vegas is not a family thing. No matter how hard they tried, and they even did a 180 on that. But my kids were raised at a time where everything focused on kids, and I, as the parent, did a lot of that conversation, not because I said so, but here's why. Here's why everyone gets a trophy. Here's why everyone gets this. Here's why. My kids were raised expecting to be told why.
Yep.
And so now you put them in the marketplace. My kids are 26 and 20. You put them in the marketplace, and this is what they've been used to as far as conversation. Now your kids are a little younger. I don't know if it's the same. I know the world in general. Oh, is it? Okay.
I can't speak for the world in general. I can speak for the way my wife and I have raised my kids. They're 14 and 12, almost 15 and 12. And we didn't get by with because I said so.
Well, sure.
You have to go to bed because little kids need their sleep. They need it, and we had to explain this. And I have a family member when my son, my 12-year-old, and her son are a week apart. So they are very similar, and were being raised at the same time. And her answer was always, you can't reason with a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old. And my wife and I always said, no, you have to reason with them because they need to understand why decisions are made. So really, and what you're saying, and I guess I'm agreeing with, is we've created this. And now and the older generation has created this. We're part of that. And so now we're trying to figure out, well, we created this. How do we work with it?
Right. Right. Well, how come they're behaving that way in the workplace? Well, guess what? Because they were brought up to behave this way. Now at home, you have that emotional element, and I think over the last 5 years or so, personal and emotional elements of life have seeped in to the workplace. My least favorite comment: work-life balance. Yep. Because if you distinguish them so separately, then your life is not in balance at all.
And you'll never achieve that.
Right. It should just be life balance.
Right.
And so if you approach it that way, life is part of work, and you can't go to work and just put your life on hold. It doesn't happen. And it really doesn't happen when you carry your life with you in the palm of your hand in your cell phone. But
I think back to another life I had when I was running a franchise, and I was actually an owner of one of the franchise locations. And my big thing was, look, we all have lives, keep it outside. The clients, the customers, they don't want to hear about your life. That's not the right way to be.
How many years ago? How many years ago was that?
I'm thinking.
Too many to count, apparently. But
probably 12 years ago.
And I would argue, if you're talking about a salon franchise, that was probably one of the types of businesses that you actually could get away, because it's a very personal kind of service. I have to say, I know an awful lot about my hairstylist.
And my wife does too. My wife does too.
Right, and she's in my generation.
Yeah.
So I think personal has seeped into the workplace for sure, and it's accepted. And for millennials, it's sort of a natural progression. Why would they leave anything at the door? It's just another part of their day is going to work. So
it's true.
You can't bring that old school mentality and hire a millennial and say, it's your job, just do it. they have different ideas and they see the world differently. And in all honesty, the world is a little different than it was when we got our first jobs. And if you're working for someone who's several generations older than you, they may not be so much in touch with new things in a workplace. If we go back to what you were saying, well, we've always done it that way.
Right.
And that may not be the best way to do it anymore. With millennials coming on board, they can bring new ideas.
But I think it's important that the old guard listen to their ideas and not just dismiss, as people want to do. They dismiss them, and I feel like they're the ones, the millennials, that are really going to shape the way businesses are. It's no longer, their ideas are no longer acceptable to just be quiet. It's, they've got to be out there. And I think it's imperative on the old guard, I'll call it, to sort of go with that. But those are also the same people that are saying, I don't want to be on Twitter. I don't want to be on Facebook. I don't want to, forget email. I don't need to email. I just need to do, you just need to do your job. And so I think there's going to be a bit of the learning curve for a while. I do, and I think that's okay.
But it's not going to be the millennials during the learning.
No.
From everything we've learned, they're as much as older generations may start to move to find a center ground. I'm not sure the millennials are going to do so. They're going to gravitate to those organizations that sort of tolerate and even further, accept them for who they are. And I think the underlying cause of that is, in a very good way, this generation is more tolerant and accepting of diversity.
Yes.
So when you've been brought up to be accepting and you get into a workplace where who you are isn't acceptable, that's very confusing.
I have a question though, and something you've said sort of sparked it, that we, again, the older generation, needs to learn how to work with millennials. I'm going to play devil's advocate just for a second. And why do the millennials not need to learn a bit on how to deal with the older generation? How come it's the older generation needs to bend to their will and not have a meeting of the minds where, okay, I'm going to give a little and you're going to give a little. There will be times where I'll do exactly what you want, but if I tell you to do something, I don't have 20 minutes to debate why we're doing it. As the employer, sometimes you need to do what you're told. I know that sounds harsh, but why shouldn't there be a confluence of learning from each other as opposed to one from the other?
I'm not sure there shouldn't be. I think what we've learned so far is just that there isn't. And potentially the reason there isn't is because there isn't the loyalty to the employer that we've had in years past. And, if you're not treating me the way I want to be treated, I quit. And they move on to another position, especially you're talking about people in their 20s, which, unless they are highly educated, are probably in entry-level positions. So you've got, how much does the employer need them versus how much they need the employer? And if they're in the power position, meaning, they can come and go as they please because they can find another entry position somewhere else. And, there are a percentage of them still living at home, so they don't have the demands of the expense of supporting themselves. There may be that mentality that, do it my way or I'll find someone who will.
So it's play by my rules or I take my ball and leave. Pretty
much. I mean, not a blanket statement for every millennial.
No.
Tough word coming out. But I stumbled on it a lot today. But I think also what they're bringing to the table is a fresh look at things. And so they really do have in some way a power position to bring a new way of doing things, and not just a new way today, a new way because I'm me, but a new way because tomorrow and the day after and the day after, technology continues to evolve.
Yes.
And if older generations aren't even to the point of being on Twitter or email marketing, which are the two things you mentioned, right? That's already yesterday. So if the older generation isn't smart enough to realize that the millennials bring more than just a body to work, then that's not the place for the millennial, because they're bringing ideas, good, bad, ugly, regardless. They're bringing ideas that are relevant to the technology that's going on today, because they live their lives through it.
Right.
And technology is a huge separator of generations. All right, hold on. We've got Ralph actually jumping into the conversation, which is awesome. Welcome. Hey.
Hi. Hopefully, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can.
Great. I'll be the old man in the group. I was actually just typing in that I'm 62, and I have a 31 and a 29-year-old.
Okay.
But, they're sort of on that cusp to some degree. Actually, both of them grew as this technology grew.
Yes.
And I've always been in my career on sort of the bleeding edge of what was happening technologically, and sort of incorporated that to my own lifestyle, if you will. But when you start talking about millennials, it strikes a chord. It's a whole different generation, and I like to believe that I'm very good with all age ranges, not necessarily millennials, but I have this conversation with a lot of similar people in similar situations, and the word that keeps coming up is a sense of entitlement, a sense of a sense of expectation that previous generations didn't have. That sometimes with little or no effort, they feel entitled and to get and have certain things, that they should just be part of the fabric of their social life. And I don't know how much of that is a result of technology or peer pressure or workplace environment. I can certainly say, as an observation from watching and working in the millennial workplace, and you said it before, Craig, it's certainly far less structured. You had a job. This is your job. Here's your desk. Here's your seat. Go to work. If you don't do it, you're fired.
Right.
Right.
Not to mention things like dress and everything else. I mean, I wasn't until my senior year of high school that they even allowed kids to wear jeans. And that was a major victory way back in 1969. 69, 70. So.
Well, you bring up an interesting point about, dress. I have, two kids, almost 15, 12. The 15-year-old in high school can basically wear whatever he wants as long as they're to the knee and not whatever. The younger one does have a dress code, but that's not going to hold over. And so as the kids, become millennials themselves, and I don't know that that'll be the term they use, I notice a casualization, yes, I'm making up a word, of work today. People are just, and I feel like I live in Southern Florida, and when I wear a jacket to go to an event, I'm overdressed. I think we're getting some feedback on your...
Sorry, I'm trying to kill this thing here.
That's why I love these technologies.
Yeah.
No, interesting topic on dress codes. I agree that it's not that professional level that we all sort of we brought to the table, and regardless of your position in the organization. You brought almost a personal brand, understanding. Well, this goes back to what we were saying, understanding that work is work, and the rest of my life is the rest of my life. But now it's really, you know, a very gray area between work and the rest of your life, and they easily.
Well, here's a perfect example. If all three of us were to turn around, all three of us are in what it looks like a home environment.
Home office.
Right. So the definition of where we work has changed. So why am I going to wear a suit if I'm in my, you know, I'm going to step out the door here at 3:30 and my kids are here from school and, you know, you get into life. So why wear the suit? I still wear a blazer when I, you know, if I'm in front of an audience. But there's even the question as to whether that's appropriate anymore. The last one I did, I asked if I could take it off. They're like, yes, please, you're killing us by having it on.
Right.
Well,
look at some of today's icons, right? That they grew up watching, such as the Steve Jobs or the Mark Zuckerberg. You know, I can't even picture either of those in a suit, and they certainly make a lot more money than I do and run organizations much larger than I do. And so it's not necessarily about how you're dressing; it's about what you bring to the table.
Show me.
Yeah.
I used to have a boss many, many years ago that would say, "Don't tell me about the labor pains, just show me the baby."
But it's a two-way street now with the millennials. So the employers are, what can you do for me? And the millennials are, well, what's in it for me? You know, and that may go back to the entitlement, but I think we were talking earlier about all of what a millennial is has some relevance to the way in which they were brought up. And you know, if you look at the three of us as models, we all have home offices, and we all admittedly have maintained knowledge of the advancements of technology. So all our kids grew up in homes that were entitled.
But but I would assume that they also a lot of child rearing is as much of what they see as what we tell them. It's, you know, how we sort of lead by example.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
I'm going to guess, certainly as a baby boomer, I'm going to guess you guys are baby boomers too.
I don't know if I qualify yet.
No, you're too young.
No, you're a little younger.
Just saying.
Right. I think we were conditioned differently to workplace environments. When I was in high school and college, the thought was that, you know, you got out, you got a job, and of course, a professional, if you were a lawyer, doctor, you were expected to be in that position as a career. But even outside of that, if you were a non-professional, let's say, there was generally a workplace expectation that that wanted you to be there for a long time. There was a commitment that you had to make when you got the job. You thought, because I remember it used to be a fear of mine that, oh my God, you know, if I get this job, am I going to have to stay there for 20 years? You know, and how would this hurt me if I leave after 5 and they say, well, how come you left your employer, or why did they let you go, or whatever the reason may be? You know, you had this, maybe our parents' generation had conditioned us to thinking that you go through school, you get your degree, you get your job, and you build your family, and that's life. And, you know, if you change jobs in the course of your career, it's out of the norm.
See, but on the other side, my father is 72, and he's had, you know, when I was younger, more jobs than I could recount. And he'll tell you, you know, I left one job and made less money, but there was a better experience. I'm an attorney, and I don't practice. I did it for 3 years at the DA's office, and just found that, you know, it wasn't what I wanted. So I went and did something else. So
that's one of those things my father always used to remind me was, well, get the degree, become a lawyer, become a doctor, then do whatever you want, because you could fall back on that.
Yeah. And so here's interesting. My daughter is an art school and doing well. So we're all anticipating that that's her career. My other daughter is going to school for computer science and not too sure. And my ex-husband keeps saying, well, we'll just get your degree because you're going to need something to fall back on. Where my her sister isn't going down that path. She doesn't need to have something to fall back on. She's got an actual career as her degree. And it makes me cringe that you don't have the support of the initial thought that you need something to fall back on. Why? Because I'm not going to be successful. That's an old message.
My son graduated with a degree in sculpture, which
cool.
I don't know where that career path leads, but he's 31. Yeah. He still lives home, still trying to find his way in life. By the time I was 31, I was already married once and divorced. and not that that's sort of a different comparison, but
no. By the time I was 31, I had 3 kids.
I had 1 kid in the house.
So it's a different.
And he's looking to start his career, and still sort of ambivalent about just where his art experience is going to take them. How does he as a millennial sort of become an artist in this world? How does he use the modern tools, Blab, a Periscope, to promote his art? And maybe he's a little unusual because he's in some sense lacks some of the social skills. He's one of these types that is very content to work alone. Right. So I find that interesting, but I also find a lot of interesting statistics. I used to think that I was alone in having adult-age kids still in the house, but I'm not. It appears to be a lot. I don't know if it's comforting or if it's an epidemic.
It's the generation. I mean, if you go back to what you were saying earlier about how we were raised, and I know, Craig, you're a little younger, but my parents both passed, but they remember the Depression, the recession. They remember the bread lines and not having money, and like every
the Depression was the Depression and the war
had meeting,
the big war, were the centerpieces of their life.
That's right. And so they have kids, and that's what they instill, graduate, get a job, like security and stability, those were really important to them. And so I haven't lived through, we've lived through in the last, 30 years, some disasters and some wars and, some horrific things, but they didn't necessarily disrupt my life to the extent that my parents' lives were disrupted, that it made me rethink and give a different lesson to my kids. The lesson I have to my kids is do what you love. And if you don't get a job, go start a company, because it's, and so maybe that's, part of the entitlement that we're not pressuring them the way I was pressured, for lack of a better word, as a kid, that this is the world and you have to do X, Y, Z. That world didn't exist anymore when I was a kid. It was a holdover from my parents. And now, the world that's out there isn't the one that I was trying to teach my kids how to live in, because it's different
and,
now
and
for
moving
them as
very
well.
quickly.
When they're 4 and 5, it's different. The advancements are ridiculous. And that's why I think the generations are less and less compatible, because each generation has a very different world. And you start talking about dress codes, MTV came out. Granted, I didn't have kids when it came out, but when, the dress code on television started.
Well, I often wonder.
And that was, I think, something.
And Craig, maybe you can address this because your kids are a bit younger, but and I was having this conversation with my son the other day about, if you think about a child born in the last 4 or 5 years, let's say, all of this technology already exists for them. It's an incredible tool base for them to launch whatever, to communicate. but it's going to be second nature to them. And in some sense, this is very rudimentary, and it's going to be primitive by the time, this is going to change so much in the next 12 to 18 months alone.
Yeah.
They're brought up in an age of, I hate to use the overused expression of the information age, but they're brought up in an age more so where information is so readily available. I marvel all the time at my phone and say, it's incredible that I can do almost anything. Now I could broadcast live around the world to an audience. It's mind-boggling when you think about that. When you think about the reach that has and the power that has. So I wonder, how do you filter this information? The kids, the young children filter it out themselves? How do parents keep them from certain things? Because, somebody once told me, I always remembered, in everything we reach its opposite. And I always thought, well, that's a nice expression, because it's the yin and the yang. And while our best intentions may come out in things like this, yesterday was an example of ill intentions in the news piece in Virginia, the guy who shot the two news reporters live, And that's one of those things that sort of sat in the back of my mind, thinking about, I love this live broadcasting, and I love to be able to interact and communicate with people around the world and convey a message. But is there a dark side to that?
There is. And with two younger kids, it's something my wife and I worry about quite a bit. I actually think my family and my kids are a little bit different in that they do self-regulate what they watch. If my younger son comes, and he's 12, and says, I want this video game, the older one is on YouTube finding out what the game is really about and how bad or good it is. And he's got this belief that he can control whether he can have it or not. And 9 times out of 10, he's correct. It'll be too violent, or, it's fine. The older one also, we're exposing him to a little bit more. We've taken to watching, I don't know if either of you watched John Oliver on Sunday nights on HBO.
Yes.
And so we've taken to watching that with him either Monday or Tuesday night. And he's just exploded in his love of the way John Oliver displays news.
He's uncensored.
Right. Not only is he uncensored, but he's really going at things from a medium point of view. He's not, if it's bad, he's telling you if it's bad. If we think it's bad and he thinks it's good, he's taking a middle road. And so we sort of trust them in the way they were brought up to self-censor that. However, my younger son has friends who do not, and who watch shows that are inappropriate for them. And my kids will tell me about it. I can't believe so-and-so watches this. So I think it's just something that you have to teach them right from wrong. And look, it really is no different than when your kids were younger and Ellen, your kids were younger. It's just the medium is different. They have more access to news and information. And I think that's terrific. They're so much more informed than I was. And I love that. It's
right, but what you could do is offer them the truth. And I know what I said to my kids was, look, there's all kinds of information out there, and you're going to learn all sorts of things. And there's no question you can't ask me.
Exactly.
And that I won't give you an answer, that I will give you an honest, truthful answer for. Yep. And when they were at that age, when they were very young and they were discovering sex and other, they had all these questions that most kids would giggle and laugh at and find out from their friends. And they would come, sometimes I'd be very shocked at some of the things they asked, but I always gave them very straight up, very candid answers. And I said, a lot of times at the kid level, they're not learning they're learning what other kids think. It's not
right.
Truth.
Right. And we do the same thing. The kids know that I don't care what the topic is, using sex as one. I don't care. You want to talk about it? Let's talk about it.
That's right.
Doesn't matter. And
So I think what hasn't changed is the necessity for parents to be engaged with their kids. So, back when everyone was sitting around the radio, listening to things when the news came on, it was time for the kids to leave, and so today it's a little opposite, where they see the news first and come and ask questions later. But the involvement of the parent is still, if not more important than it was before, because of the access to so much stuff. And in some cases, you're going to find that, parents are relying on the technology to be the parent. So when you have engaged parents, I think you have the kids who can self-regulate. I know when my kids were younger, my son would go visit and say, "Oh yeah, the computer, you should see what he's doing on his computer. It's up in his room." We never put the computers up in the kids' bedrooms. The computers were in the living room, so I could look over their shoulder anytime I wanted to see what they were doing. Now, granted, as they get older, they stayed up later than I did, so who knows?
Yeah. And iPhones and iPads have a tendency to go into their room with them.
Yes.
Which was not the case when they were still living with me. And in fact, I don't think any of them have any of that, because the 20-year-olds, I'm still paying for stuff, so I know they don't. But yeah, there wasn't that go off on your own and have the world at your fingertips. That wasn't the way we managed things in our house. And so you've still got responsibility as a parent, regardless of what generation.
Oh, absolutely.
What generation.
And I think in many ways we're a lot closer to our kids. I think, as odd as it may sound, the incongruity of the technology sort of actually, rather than separating us, it brings us a little closer, in the sense that it allows us to engage with the kids over something else. It could just as well be baseball, but it's about that engagement with your children and participating in the things that either interest them or that you want to turn them on to, in a sense. And I think we're closer. I look at how different I was from my parents' generation, in the sense that my music, growing up in the era of rock and roll and the Beatles, and I remember vividly watching the Beatles on Ed Sullivan when they made their U.S. premiere, and they looked so clean cut. Now, my hair is longer now than it was then, but than the Beatles was. But I remember my father saying, "Look at those animals." Wow. And there was this total disconnect, and I would search to try to find the right type of rock music that my parents might like, whereas my kids and I listen to the same music.
Yeah.
There's no separation. They listen to rock and roll and whatever. Fortunately, we have broad musical tastes, but we listen to the same things. And my point is that that's a common bond. It's one of those things that you can engage with, where there was a greater separation between me and my parents.
So here we have an example of of you keeping up with what's important with them, and then we send them into the workforce, and they have similar expectations. Yes, exactly. Oh, well, okay, here's what's important to me. It must be important to you because that's the way I was raised. And I think the millennial generation, I'm almost thinking they, because they had great parents, they enter the workforce thinking they're going to be treated just as well. And it's sort of a rude awakening that work doesn't work the same way as school and home, but they don't see the difference.
And that's sort of the separation of the work-life balance. Work and life are work is life and life is work, and home is your family at work and at home. And so therefore everybody should work together and act similarly.
Right. I collaborate at home.
Well, it's interesting. You were talking about dress in the workplace before. It used to be considered a coat of armor in a sense. You dressed for work. There was a clear distinction of how you dressed at work. I'd go in a suit and a tie. I didn't hang out at home that way. Now there's far less separation of how you dress at home versus how you dress at work.
Because work is home for a lot of people.
Work can be home, or even if it's not. I mean, I'm always amazed when I see some of the workplace environments, and it's just jeans and a pair of shorts, and just go in and just hang, and that's the same way it is at home.
Because it's comfortable, and they want to work in a comfortable environment. People, look, it's much more comfortable to wear a short sleeve shirt and no tie and no jacket and just sort of get stuff done. You just do. You get more done that way, I think.
Yeah, there's a scene from the movie Working Girl where she moves up from being like an administrative assistant to more powerful in her organization. So she dresses the part. And then she goes to her ex-boyfriend's house or whatever. And she walks in and he goes, "Oh, what'd you have to go to court
Alec
or something
Baldwin,
today?" Yeah. So, and she was like, "No, I'm coming from work." So, it's a combination of how you dress for work is different than you dress at home, and also the notion of you dress for the part you want, or you dress for success.
Well, there's a lot of truth to that.
And I don't know that that's
think
still
it is
the case.
Mark Zuckerberg would tell you he doesn't dress for success. Wears this, jeans and a t-shirt.
Right. It's back to productivity.
Right. Steve Jobs didn't dress for success.
But a lot of it is how you condition your mind. I go back a number of years, and I had a boss that I used to say, "Well, why do I have to wear a suit and a tie every day? I'm in this office and in a cubicle, and all I do is talk to people on the phone." And he said, when you're on the phone with people, you sound the way you dress. And you have to sort of, he used to make people sit there with a mirror in front of them to watch themselves as they spoke on the phone. He used to make some people stand up while they spoke on the phone because of the theory that you work better on your feet. You think more quickly or quicker. There's a little bit of truth to all of that, but I don't know how it migrates into the millennial age.
I'm sure there is, but I agree. If I'm sitting in a cubicle, I don't need to be in a suit and tie. Look, I'm still a big believer in dressing up when I need to.
Yes.
Even now, I was on an earlier Blab with people I consider sort of forward thinkers in the marketing space, Mike Stelzner, Joel Comm, and they were both, it just so happened, Mike Stelzner and Joel Comm were both in T-shirts from a brand called Life is Good, and that doesn't mean they're any less authoritative, that they're any less on top of what they're doing, because they're in T-shirts.
I agree.
It just means they're in their studio, home, office. Joel Comm was on his way to go running, and he made it a point to say that. Just like, look, I'm jumping off because I'm going running. Baseball, it's just, I think we need to accept the fact that we shouldn't judge the book by its cover.
Oh, I agree. I think we carry over some conditioned rules that we learned, and we have to be as flexible and accepting the new millennials.
But I think we all need to be.
Yeah.
I think they do. I think we do. Eventually, we'll work it out.
But I do worry that I wonder if there's going to be, if there's age discrimination, especially now. I guess I'm more sensitive to that because in some sense, I feel very much in tune with the younger generation. I feel like I can communicate with them. I'm comfortable with them. With my kids and their friends, and I enjoy hanging out with Dad. And but I wonder if the reciprocal is true. It's just whether there would be there's a lot to learn from old geezers like me.
Absolutely.
And I'd love to share a lot of that, and that's experiential learning. That's life lessons that somehow can't be taught, but they can be conveyed. Here's what happened to me. Let me explain it and maybe you could find some gold nugget of value in it, you know. And I hope that they open themselves up to the older folks as much as the older folks open themselves up to the millennials.
and I think it will happen.
Yeah,
I do.
I think it does happen, but I think I think the onus is on the older generation to show, or to bring the olive branch, to use an old term, right? To say, okay, you know, right. I'm game. You know, talk to me. What do you need from me for this to be successful? Okay. And when you gain their trust, then that opens the conversation.
How can I help you?
Yep.
Right.
You know,
they're asking what's in it for me. You have to ask how can I help you?
Yeah. And you know, without regard for what am I going to get out of this?
Yes.
You know,
and I think they'll come around
because then you will.
You know, it in many ways parallels what I see a lot of people experiencing in Periscope and Meerkat and all the personal broadcasting services that are launching as well as Blab, is everybody sort of openly wondering, what's the value proposition? How can I, you know, how do I turn this into revenue? How do I monetize this? How do I capitalize on what I know, and how do I share it? And it's easy to share it, but how do I benefit from it other than just the goodwill of feeling that I've shared my wisdom? You know, yep. So it's the same thing. And then I hear people say, you know what, I stopped thinking about that, and all I do is put it out there, and you know, here it is.
Yeah, just let it go. Yeah, let it go. It'll come back.
And don't worry about, well, how make sure this is structured so that I can get a check. Yeah. You know, don't worry about it. Put it out. Yep. What I tell my son with his artwork, I'm not an established artist. I said, but you got to just put it out there. And, you know, you can't curate your own art.
Nope.
People will either like it or not.
Right.
And that's it.
And not everybody knows he's not established. I mean, if you're not following the artwork.
And it doesn't matter, you know.
You know, I can't tell you who
people buy what they like.
If it's something I
like, they don't buy what they don't like.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the people that hunt for name artists, they're 1%ers. And they're
investors.
Right. Yeah. All right, guys, I got to jump off. Nice to meet you both.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Ralph.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me join the conversation. Yeah, we'll see you again.
Appreciate it. Take care. See you around.
All right.
Well, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, you know, and as with the last Blab, you know, when you have more than just two people involved, you get the additional information and conversation. But it also sparks new thoughts and ideas about my own perception and things. And they really did come down to me that it's about the parents, you know, that each generation is developing the next generation. So the values we bring are the ones that form that.
Absolutely.
And if they're feeling entitled,
it's because we made it that way.
We must have we handed it to them at some point. Whether it was direct or it was the fact, you know, my kids never had you give them money every week. What's that? An allowance. Right. They never had an allowance. I never had an allowance. I never had an allowance because my parents had not enough money.
Right.
My kids didn't have an allowance simply because I didn't, not for any other reason besides. But whenever they sort of really wanted something or needed something, hey, this is going on at school, we need so much, you know, X amount of money. I had that kind of money.
Right.
You know, not that we had a lot, but we had enough to do what they wanted. So they never really felt like they needed or wanted, or very rarely did I ever say no, because they weren't asking for things above and beyond. They were, hey, I need this. Okay. You know, the occasional, no, we're not going to go on a 4-week vacation. Okay, fine. You know, if something elaborate came up that you said no. And I do remember being at the supermarket a few times when, you know, my ex-husband had been laid off. He's a union electrician. So, you know, jobs came and went. so there were times at the supermarket where I'm like, I'm sorry, we can't get the extra gallon of ice cream this week. We got to get, real food. And they were fine because the percentage of no was so small. But that didn't mean we were loaded with money, but it definitely meant if you ask for it, you're going to.
As long as you ask judiciously,
But they didn't get that point.
But they must have.
No, because they still got their no's. They asked for stuff, and some stuff got no, but more stuff got yes. So you raise a generation of kids where the 8 times out of 10 they've got a yes. They're going to go into the next phase of their life expecting that that's the way things are.
That's true. I mean, my kids do get an allowance, but it's for work performed. You don't do the work, you don't get the allowance. And that's not for the school stuff. It's not for the, whatever. It's for the stuff they want. You want a new video game? No problem. You have an allowance that you can work to get it. And if it's 3 weeks from now, well, so be it. But we're also of the same mind as you. You're in the grocery store. Can we get, this? Sometimes it's yes. Sometimes it's no. And they're okay with it.
Right.
Although I do find sometimes that the no, they do say why. So we're raising.
Of course they do.
We're raising the why generation still because we have to explain why. Well, because this week we're only buying X. And
maybe it's because they're just smarter. Like you said, they're so much more
maybe.
Informed at any given age than we were because of the access they have to so much information.
Totally. They are so much more informed than we were.
So they're smarter, they're inquisitive, they have expectations.
Why are we surprised?
And everything's about, right, and everything is, what's in it for me. So that's the generation that's in the workforce. And so you do read a lot about millennials still living at home. And are they employable? The answer to that is yes, because they're knowledgeable and probably productive, but they're not going to be employable if employers don't understand how to create an environment that brings out the best of them.
I like that. Good point.
All right. We'll wrap it up on that one since we're just about an hour.
All right.
And we'll do another one of these next week and see if we can. So we had a millennial join us the first time and a baby boomer with millennial kids join us the second time.
I kind of took offense to the being called a baby boomer.
You'll get
over
it. So we'll see, but it's definitely, this is without a doubt an ongoing conversation.
Oh yeah, totally agree. Completely agree.
All right.
All right. So we'll see you soon.